welcome to the 12 Months to Marathon podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with Marathon Dreams. Episode 71, how much running do you actually have to do? So what's going on with me at the moment? Right, so I am in a bit of that limbo stage, which I'm assuming a lot of you may be as well. I start marathon training 22nd of December for my spring marathon, which is on April the 12th. I did High Rocks a couple of weeks ago. As you may know, if you're a regular listener of this podcast, I dropped a 20-kilogram sandbag on my foot a couple of weeks ago. The good news is that is healing nicely. The bruising's come down, as is the swelling, so making progress there. And I'll probably talk about that on another podcast, how to deal with that physically and mentally. But what I wanted to talk about with this episode was based on some questions that I had from my coaching community, really, people who've come into my program recently. Of course, if you ever want any information about achieving your marathon goals over the next 12 months, all you need to do is hop over to Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon and follow me over there. You can drop me a message. We can have a chat about how we can help. I specialise in helping the over 35s as well, because that's the age I was at when I did my first marathon as well. So if you wanted me to explain that one. So I wanted to talk about this because a few people say to me, right, I want to do a marathon next year, say spring, and I'm not sure that I can because I can't commit to the number of runs I need to do in order to achieve that. And I think over the next few weeks, I think for a lot of runners, particularly if you've got spring marathon goals or even spring half marathon goals or any goals that are falling into the start of next year, I think it's a time for reflection, really. I mean, I like to keep myself sharp over this period. You know, I'm very, because I've been in the fitness industry for a long time, I see what potential quote unquote damage the end of the year can do with people, particularly if they completely shut up shop. But I'm not talking to your foot off the gas a little bit and relax a little bit. Of course, that's all understandable at this time of year. What I'm talking about is completely shutting up shop. That for me is a little bit of a problem, particularly with the way modern life is now. We're pushed to be more sedentary. We're pushed to eat more, particularly around this time of year. So I think you have got to be a little bit careful, but you have also got to relax and reflect and enjoy yourself. So I think this is a good time of year to reflect. So a few people have come to me and said, right, I want to do a spring marathon. How often do I realistically need to run? I'm going to focus on marathons today because I think that's the thing that overwhelms a lot of people. So it does seem quite daunting because when we go and do our research and we look online, we're going to get bombarded with loads of different options and loads of different plans and loads of different ideas, including stuff that I put out there. Now, I can only go on my 15 marathons and where are we now? 11 years of marathon running experience and, you know, multiple other endurance events as well. I can only go on that experience with you. And for me, I think the first thing is when you look at the first thing to do, I think you've got to give yourself realistically about 16 weeks, especially if you're a newbie. So if it's your first marathon, I would say give yourself 16 weeks, even up to 20 weeks. Now, Kat, who came on the podcast, a couple of weeks ago, she did her first marathon and she actually did a 20-week plan because she wanted to make sure that she allowed for any sort of leeway and lumps and bumps on the road. So that's never a bad thing. So if you are doing a spring marathon, you know, I wouldn't be 100% shutting up shop at this time of year. I'll be potentially saying, right, okay, what can I do in the meantime to keep building my base? And I also did a podcast on this as well about sort of the end of year plan and how to approach the end of the year, how I would approach it. So that's the first thing. Now, so I would be looking at probably minimum 16 weeks, ideally for any sort of marathon plan. That tends to be a good length of time, and also it allows you to build up, peak, and then come down at the necessary rate. So I've always followed, well, I'd not say always, when I've become a serious marathon runner, which is probably my last 5 to, where am I now, 15? No, probably my last 9 or 10 marathons, I followed a proper plan. The first 6 or 7, I was a bit all over the shop. But anyway, that's another story for another day. So anyway, so I would be looking at 16 weeks first. So that's the thing. So can you commit to 16 weeks of training? Now, it doesn't mean 16 weeks of permanent training, because if you are new to this podcast and you haven't heard me use this metaphor before, marathon training, let's go with marathons, you could use this for half marathon training as well, needs to be like a jigsaw puzzle, in my opinion. And what you need to do at the end of it is be able to look at the jigsaw and say, have I got enough pieces in there so I know exactly what it is? Now, You might not have all the pieces, but you'll have enough in there to say, yep, that's a whatever it might be on the jigsaw. So that's what you need to look at. And you need to understand that consistency is built over time. It's not built on weeks. Yeah. So a big mistake that people make with marathon training, spoiler alert, we'll probably cover this again later or at the start of the year, is that they're looking at week 10 when they're in week 1. You need to do week 1 first before you look at week 10. A little bit of advice for you there. So on that note, how often do you actually need to run to train for a marathon? Now, let me start with me. Okay. Now, when I train for a marathon, if I'm going for what I do, which I follow a sub-3 plan because that's the kind of time that I fit around. So I've done 2 sub-3 marathons after the age of 45, go me. And then when did this happen? And I've also done 5 or 6 have been in the in 3 and single digits. Okay. So, I am what you would call a good club runner. In essence. So I've done 2 sub-3 marathons, but I always follow the same sort of plan. Now, on my plan, you could realistically run 7 days a week on it. I would normally run at least 6, and that's because I really want to bring it home. Now, I've got the kind of life, because I'm self-employed and the way I set things up, that I can do that. I'm aware not everybody can do that. So what you've got to remember about marathon training is, in my opinion, only me, some people might disagree with this, it is a volume game, and I think you need to put miles on your legs. It might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised. I've seen some plans and some ethoses that try and bypass the system. I think if you're a first-time marathoner, you need volume. You need to understand what volume feels like. You need to understand what running with fatigue feels like, because on the day, you are going to run with fatigue. And when you've never ran a marathon, the only way you get used to running a marathon is by running one. So if you put a lot of volume on in training, then you're going to be in a better place, in my opinion, to run the marathon. That said, how much volume is enough? Well, we'll talk about that. I think that if you are in a place where you realistically can't commit to a good level of training for a marathon, you shouldn't really be doing one, because I think it is going to hurt if you are not ready, and you're really not ready. I mean, it's probably going to hurt's probably the wrong word, but it is going to be very uncomfortable first time out. But it doesn't have to be massively uncomfortable if you train properly. So how much training do you have to actually need to do? So let me give you a real life example. Somebody came to me and said, I can only run 3 times a week. Can I train for a marathon? Okay. My answer to that question was yes, I think you can. Now, dependent on what time you're going for, because time is critical here. Because if you are looking for a specific time, then we've got to look at the plan, all right? Because that's different. So I think if you're looking to, quote unquote, get round with a loose time in your head, and I always give 3 times, which is your content, happy, ecstatic. Content is, I'll take that. Happy is, I've surprised myself. Ecstatic is, you're jumping through hoops, yeah? So you should always do 3 times. And the reason why you should do those 3 is so you don't bet the farm on one time and be disappointed if you don't hit it, even if it's a good performance, if that makes sense. So can you train for a marathon running 3 times a week? Yes, you can. What you have to look at there is what kind of time you're going for. So, for example, I don't think, and again, I'll happily debate this, I don't think that I could train for sub-3 with 3 runs a week, for example. I think I'd need to add more volume onto that. Now, let's say we're not going to talk about strength and conditioning. We're not going to talk about anything else. We're just going to talk about pure running here. So if you are running 3 days a week, the way to look at this or think about this, in my opinion, is this. You would want to split that into a short run, a medium run, and a long run. And that would depend on where you are in the cycle, if that makes sense. So if you're early in the cycle, that could look something like 4 miles, 6 miles, 10 miles, for example. If you're later in the cycle, that could look something like 6 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles, and upwards like that, yeah? So 3 runs a week can be doable, and I would split them into short, medium, and long, and then that will evolve as the journey goes. Now, if you're following the right plan, dare I use that word, but in my opinion, the right plan, it should be like an inverted horseshoe, so it should build up, peak, and then come down again with some adaptation in there. Okay, and that adaptation's built into that peak section of the plan, which usually is about week 9 to 14, just before you taper, okay, depending on the type of plan that you're following. So if you look at it on that basis and say, well, okay, I want to do a short, medium, and long, and then you build up to a decent level of long run, in my opinion, you probably should be doing at least 3 20-mile runs in a marathon training cycle. That's what I think is what necessary, particularly for first timers. Again, if you're a conditioned athlete, you might be able to get away with less than that. Or if you really can't do that, you might be able to get away with less than that. But for me, I think that you should be doing at least 20 milers. Now, I had a conversation the other day with a couple of lads from the Clean Break podcast, to make sure you check those guys out. I will get them on at some point. And they were talking about they've started recently running for time, which is something that I've never done. But again, we go back to this thing about, does it work? And if it works for you, great. My question always with a time-based plan is, if you are a first timer, and let's say your goal is to run the marathon in 5.5 hours, if you're only training up to 3 hours, how is that helping you to run for 5.5? Whereas if you ran 20 miles in training, then you're going to get a better feel for what that feels like. That's the debate. And I'll call it a debate because, again, I don't think there's any right and wrong. It's just about what's going to help you achieve your goals. So if you can run 3 times a week, back to what I was talking about, and you want to maybe get a little bit faster, then you would need to incorporate some speed or hill work into one of those runs. So typically that would be the medium run. In my opinion, that would be that. I know some people who build the speed work and hill work into their longer run. But if you want to get faster, and it's, say, a subsequent marathon, then you need to be building in some kind of speed work and hill work, potentially, definitely speed work, to ensure that you are comfortable at the higher paces. Now, I've talked about speed work before. I've done an introduction to it. It's on the podcast. We'll talk about it again. Running's a moving object. There's always going to be new listeners. There's always people coming in, always people following me. So there's no point me saying, well, I did a podcast as I'm not going to talk about it again, because, of course, we're heading into spring marathon season soon. So people are going to need the information again. So we can talk about speed work again. But if you want to get faster, you have to be doing some level of speed work, because what you need to do is feel comfortable at the pace and quicker that you're supposed to be running the marathon at. I'll say that again. You need to be comfortable running the pace you're running the marathon at and quicker in order to run a faster pace, in my opinion. Okay, so I would say need to be doing some speed work, and then you'd have to factor that in. So first, let's walk back through the steps to close this out so we're not labouring the point here. First and foremost, are you in a position where you can commit 16 weeks training? Yeah? That's not 16 perfect weeks, but that's enough length of time to be able to get yourself ready for a spring or later marathon. Question number 1. Question number 2 is, how many runs can you realistically do per week? Realistically. Now, I'll add a few points onto this. I've been in the health and fitness game for a long time. Someone will say to me, I haven't got time to exercise. There are 2 things to say to that. The first thing to say to that is, so by proxy, are you saying you've got time to feel like crap? But the second response is, okay, if you want to do this thing, you have to become the sort of person that allocates resources. Nobody can make time. We can't make time. It's not something we can make or produce, but we can allocate resources. So we allocate resources to things that are important to us. So if somebody says exercise is important to them, but they're not doing it, it's not important to them, because we allocate resources to things that are important to us. Because I know people, like, again, go back to listening to Kat's interview, which is a brilliant one. There's plenty of other people I've interviewed, but that's recency bias. The fact that she's got 3 kids, a job, and she's also doing a doctorate and trained for a marathon and ran it comfortably as well, tells us that there's always somebody out there doing what we want to do. So you've got to be comfortable. You can allocate the resources, or you can become the type of person that allocates the resources. That's also important. So once you've done those 2 things, you've then got to say, right, how many times can I run realistically per week? If that's 3, then you've got to say, okay, get a plan, look at it, and then say, right, can I realistically do a short, medium, and long run? Now, this is very simplistic, because what I would do as a coach, or in my coaching program, is I would help them negotiate this and help you to understand how to make this all fit. Yeah. And so it can work based on my experience of having to move around things, because I just can't go out whenever I want, even though I've got a bit of flexibility, but I haven't got that much because we've got 2 kids, no help. So I have to make sure that, I'm here and stuff and supporting the family. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. If you are considering, or you have entered a spring marathon and you're wondering how to make the training fit, and you're a little bit nervous or apprehensive about how much running and how much training that you have to do. Simple as that. Again, if you want any specific guidance or coaching, reach out at 12 Months to Marathon. Follow me over there on Instagram, and we can have a chat. And if it's a good fit for you, brilliant. I can talk you through the options. If not, then at least you've asked a question. If you do want to follow me over there, please do. You're going to get loads of daily content and tips, particularly as we head into marathon training season. That's when we come into our own, giving people all the support they need. That's at 12 Months to Marathon. I've got a free running community over there as well. Click the link in my bio and you can head on over to there, join it. And again, we offer support and accountability in there as well. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe. I appreciate that very much wherever you get your podcasts from. And again, a like, a comment, and a share really help the podcast as well. So share it with your friends. And if you can drop me a review, that's really useful to me as well. But hopefully that's given you some guidance. I appreciate every one of you for listening, as I always do. Thank you very much indeed. And I'll speak to you all soon.